Alrighty, it is noon and we are recording. Hello and welcome back to Welty at Home, the slow reading virtual book club that alternates works by Eudora Welty with works by authors connected to Welty. Today we continue our series exploring the correspondence of Eudora Welty and Ross Macdonald. In Meanwhile, There Are Letters, edited by Suzanne Mars and Tom Nolan. During this series, we will continue to read and discuss about a chapter each week, but we will be taking a 2-week spring break starting next Monday, March 6th, and we will resume our discussions on Monday, March 23rd. I am Anna Traylor, the Special Projects Coordinator at Eudora Welty House and Garden, and we are grateful to Suzanne Mars, Eudora Welty's friend and biographer and Professor Emerita of Millsaps College, for guiding these discussions. First, just some quick housekeeping. To comment or ask a question, click the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and select raise hand. If you are on a tablet or a phone, you may have to tap the screen for this option to appear, and a lively discussion often takes place in the chat, so be sure to glance over at that box every now and again. I also collect those weekly chat transcripts to send with the newsletter at the end of our series. But if you would like access to the working transcript document, please reach out to me at info@eudoraweltyhouse.com. And with that, Suzanne, where would you like to begin today's discussion?
All right. Well, I thought we'd begin with a little background information that might be helpful to our discussion, and then we'll proceed with the discussion of the book. So let me ask Tom Nolan first if he would mind telling us a little bit about Ken's relationship with his father, and then about his interviews with Paul Nelson and the book that resulted from those interviews. And Tom, you might have one other thing you wanted to talk about as well, I think.
Yeah. The gentleman who raised the notion of
I think that may have been Bill O'Connor. Yeah.
Bill O'Connor. Okay. Thank you, Bill O'Connor, for raising the notion of Ken's symptom of repeating things in his correspondence. At first, we all sort of thought that was just a common thing that people do when they have a lot of correspondence, but we can see this week that it's happening more and more. So I think you caught that early sign earlier than most other people, even probably, and it's becoming apparent. And then, of course, in the letters to Miss Welty, finally, he admits, after having said, "I really have nothing to complain about in life," he admits that he's been having these difficulties more and more. So kudos to you. As far as Ken and his father, he didn't have much of a chance to get to know his father. Actually, the father left the family when Ken was about 4 in Vancouver, and but he had some precious memories, particularly being out on a tugboat with him on the ocean, and that impressed its imprint on his whole psychology and memory and mythology throughout his life. The Pacific, the most constant thing in his life, he said. He loved his dad and, resented his dad and had all kinds of normal, you might say, feelings about him through those actions. And then I guess when he was 7, he got to spend a little bit more time with him when I think there was an attempted reconciliation in Kitchener, way back in Kitchener, Ontario. But that didn't pan out. And his father became ill and ended his days in a charity hospital in Kitchener, where his still wife, Ken's mother, went and tended to him. She was a former nurse. So he had profoundly extreme and ambivalent and angry and loving feelings towards his dad, and like a DNA coil, I guess. And was trying to, of course, the father figure is a big archetype in every story he ever wrote, I think, or every other story. Well, Paul Williams, Paul Nelson, thank you. Paul Nelson was a writer, staff writer, sort of at Rolling Stone for a number of years, and had written big cover stories about various folk. He was a devoted Macdonald reader, and had called him on the telephone as a troubled person or a concerned person. I don't want to say troubled, but he was one of the people who felt so strongly and got so much from Ken's books that he made the effort to get in touch with him personally on a non-professional basis, I think, but eventually got an assignment from Rolling Stone to write a piece about Ken, and went to Santa Barbara and spent some time, considerable time, much of a summer, doing long interviews with Ken in his beach club cabana, and spent some time in New York also with Ken when Ken travels to New York, as he describes in this chapter. And they did hours and hours of talking, during which Ken realized his memory problems were growing. And although he didn't mention it, of course, to Paul. The problem with the interviews from Paul's point of view was Ken was very reluctant. Well, he was adamant about there being nothing about the daughter Linda in the interviews, in the printed story. He wasn't reluctant to talk about Linda, but not on tape and not for publication. The idea was to protect her son, the beloved Jimmy, from learning about this or having to read about it or whatnot. So Ken got his lawyer, Harris Seed, to draw up a document, an agreement, saying that Paul was interviewing him for Rolling Stone, but there was not to be any mention of things that Ken didn't want mentioned, and got Paul to sign this, and I think they got Jan Wenner to sign this, and Paul consequently felt hamstrung artistically, journalistically. He couldn't find a way to write, meaningfully about Ken, in the way that was his specialty, without talking about Linda, which was such a central aspect of his work and his life and his books. So every week, some of us who knew about the existence of these interviews, did I do something?
No.
I would look long after I'd lost contact with Paul. Not that we were close, but I would look every week in Rolling Stone for years, looking for this piece. And finally, when Ken died, Paul did write a small remembrance, very, very lovely thing, but nothing like, the feature, the interview marathon and so forth that we were led to expect. Eventually, though, Paul died under sad circumstances, and he had acquired a chronicler, a devotee, Kevin Avery, a fellow in New York, I assume, who made it his business to resurrect Paul's work and reputation. And he and Jeff Wong, who illustrated a book I edited of Ken stories, they produced this incredible work, visual and textual, including much of the interview material and a profusion, a treasure chest of Macdonald illustrations and other documents. It's a beautiful thing that I'm sure is pretty readily available and belongs on anybody's shelf who cares about Macdonald. So the interviews are wide-ranging, and even though Ken's memory and ability to express himself even verbally, spontaneously, are still in evidence. Even though they were deteriorating, there's still much in evidence, and you can get a strong impression of what a brilliant person he was, and how interested he could be in things and expressing it.
The book is titled let me get the right title here. It's All One Case, the Illustrated Ross Macdonald Archives. It's All One Case, the Illustrated Ross Macdonald Archives. And I found a copy someplace anyway, but when Tom and I were working on the book, and so I think it's still available if anyone wants to do it, to get it. All right. Well, so I wanted to ask if Harriet would talk about the piece of fiction that Eudora was working on during this year and subsequent years, called The Shadow Club, which she never published, but which is it's available for you to read here at the Department of Archives and History, and it's very interesting work on a long story or a novella. Yeah, Harriet.
Yes. In the context of her relationship with Ken Miller, Welty had been working on a crime fiction of her own, Shadow Club. Its bits and pieces, now housed at the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, are spread over more than 11 big boxes of folders. 26 boxes, I'd argue, contain snippets and fragments. Working in these, you discover that when Welty wanted to write, she wrote on the backs of bank slips, bank deposit slips, advertisements, envelopes, anything, as well as in and then on typed drafts. So the manuscript can only be known in these scattered pieces in different folders and different boxes. And you can picture me as a plainclothes detective investigating. I'll put my whole published report, an article printed in a book called Detecting the South, in the chat today later. The story's plot first germinated from a newspaper clipping about an invasion in a school teacher's home. In Welty's story, it's an invasion and rape. Welty built her plot against her character's dubious chatter about rape-race mythologies, assuming that Black men endanger white women. And I argue that if Macdonald was writing about ecological crimes, Welty in this era is often writing about the crimes of Jim Crow. But Welty is also developing a tale discovering a narrative form she described, learning when, as a child, she asked her mother about where babies come from and unexpectedly provoked the revelation of a dead baby brother, the worst secret of how babies could die. And she said the writer in her took note of this narrative form, investigating a secret and discovering a worse one. In the Welty Shadow Club plot, the central character, who has many, many names in the drafts, but I'll settle today for calling her Nell Downing, has no memory whatsoever of what happened on the night of the crime.
I think I always called her Justine, but I'll let you call her.
I know you do. I know. This is the thing about moving through. There is no manuscript out there. It's not that you can go and see the manuscript. You can go and see different parts and assemble it where you. But Nell Downing and Justine had no memory whatsoever of what happened on the night of the crime. But to her is the unlocking of her locked up past. The violence she in time recalls is not her own rape story. That will emerge, but from the rapist's own altering point of view. Memory instead brings to Downing a repressed recollection of discovering her mother naked and shot and bleeding out only feet from the bloody body of her father, who had shot himself in the head after shooting his unfaithful wife. Their daughter suddenly recalls, after a lifetime of repressing that secret, being tenderly and unwittingly led by her mother's lover, a neighbor, to keep the secret of the murder-suicide, and instead promote a cover-up story about a robber who allegedly entered the house and killed her parents. The graphic violence of Welty's manuscript, I argue, has a relationship not only to Macdonald's work, but also to her recently lived experience of the 1975 murder of her close friend, Frank Haynes. The sidestep story of the rape is finally uncovered in a section written from the perpetrator Elroy Corum's point of view. More than a Jim Crow black rapist plot, this section resembles the narratives of Richard Wright's Black boy protagonists in his crime fiction stories, especially The Man Who Killed a Shadow. Black boys caught in circumstances they aren't prepared to cope with. Elroy's narrative is the story of a boy aimlessly walking all night until it would be safe to go home. Wandering into a white neighborhood, he sees a door standing wide open and enters. After he boxes himself fearfully into a closet in her house, Nell Downing, a teacher preparing for the opening morning of the school year, assertively opens the closet door to confront her glimpsed intruder. She reads him correctly as nothing but a child. Humiliated by her estimation of him as harmless, he tells her he's come for her purse, but she's comfortable commanding him to come to school with her. And then, before he knew it, he landed a punch right on her thinker. While she's unconscious, he opens the refrigerator and eats pickles and bread and drinks sweet milk. And then in one manuscript draft, her knee at a push showed its underside to him, yawned white as a cottonmouth moccasin opening to strike. Having never before been close to a woman, before he knew what happened, he bolted into her. She didn't know. She lay as before, her eyes turned up at the clouds. Escaping by jumping a train heading north, but still without defense against forces that toss him, Elroy thinks, out there, stars dance like popcorn on the bottom of a black skillet. Welty's image of white popcorn stars exploding on the black skillet pictures whiteness as explosive, unpredictable, and yet tantalizing, a detail that helps to reveal Elroy as at the mercy of exploding emotions and hungers, overwhelmed and wishing for self-determination. I'll stop there, but I just want to mention that Welty would later design another crime fiction, Alterations. Maybe the last story that Welty started as her capacity but not desire to write gave way to dwindling health. And its topic is so unanticipated, at least for the reader who hasn't been following Welty's history with crime fiction. It's a tale of a dressmaker who kills her long-endured abusive husband by literally undertaking to make alterations to him. A battered wife's sensational solution. I'll stop there.
All right. So now this is very fragmentary, as Harriet said, and we don't know what was written when, because she's working on it over a number of years. So
she talks about stories, and we're talking about a story. Yeah.
So, but that's what she's talking about when she says she's working on a story, and she's reporting to Ken that she's working on a story. Two more little bits of background information. Two more of Eudora's friends are mentioned here that I think are important to the narrative. One is William J. Smith, the poet Bill Smith, that she met in Florence in 1950. They had been good friends ever since. He became poet laureate of the nation in 1968, was poet laureate till 1970. His The World Below the Window poems, 1937 to 1999, is a wonderful collection of his poetry. He also wrote a book which I particularly like, the Cherokee Lottery, sequence of poems. And he is one of the few people that Eudora confided her love for Ken Miller. And she confided it to Bill and his wife, Sonia, his second wife, Sonia. And she confided Ken's love for her and letters to Bill. So one of the confidants of the relationship. The other friend mentioned here is William Maxwell, who was fiction editor at the New Yorker from 1936 to 1975, and was the person who edited for the New Yorker all of Eudora's stories that were published in the New Yorker, from The Bride of the Innisfallen to The Optimist's Daughter. So a very important reader for her, very instrumental in her ability to get losing battles completed, as she notes here, a trusted advisor, also a very good fiction writer himself. If you haven't read So Long, See You Tomorrow, I recommend it to you wholeheartedly. And he wrote, and Ken makes mention of this, a book called Ancestors, A Family History. So Eudora and William Maxwell and his wife, Emmy, and their two daughters, Brookie and Kate, were very close. I find no mention at all in the correspondence with William Maxwell of Kenneth Miller. So although that was a very close relationship, and although she talked about Bill Maxwell to Ken, she did not talk about Ken to Bill Maxwell. All right, so enough background information. Let's talk about whatever you would like to talk about in these letters. Does someone want to start us out?
As we wait for hands to appear, I would like to draw our attention to some comments in the chat. So please feel free to raise your hands as I'm talking here. I would love to echo Melissa and James. Thanks to Harriet. We so appreciate you sharing that excerpt. It's wonderful. And then we have a question for Tom. It is asked, what did Jimmy know about the death of his mother or her life?
Well, we can't hear you, Tom.
I'll ask to unmute.
Oh, sorry, I don't know how that happens. I can't tell you that. I'm afraid I just don't know. They took pains, his grandparents took pains to keep things like that from him. But eventually, his father must have told him the details, and maybe as he got older. So I don't know. I'm sorry.
Alack and alas.
Yeah.
Anyone want to start us off, or shall I start us off? To me, the most moving thing in this, well, I see Pearl's up there, so let me go to Pearl first. I can't hear you. We can't hear you, Pearl.
I don't want to take precedence over your great thoughts, but I am so mad that they didn't pick up the telephone and hey, I'm going to be in New York on the 20th. And then she was, so I'm wondering why he was so hesitant to be more explicit and why she was, I don't know, they just seem so reluctant to actually meet again. Or was it because they were afraid of Margaret? Or was it because Eudora could just explain, well, I'll see you in June, whatever. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, let Tom.
I don't think either of them were really comfortable on the telephone. And Ken was prone to long pauses on the phone. People would say, Ken, are you there? And Miss Welty.
It's also true of Eudora. She didn't like talking on the telephone.
Yeah, that's what she said to me in a letter. I like her remark about it's lucky I wasn't driving on your freeways. I'd probably be run into by Margaret and Millar, which reminded us of her talking about Margaret. driving like a bat out of hell on that trip to the airport.
I think Ken was very committed to the whole idea of marriage. The idea of divorce was a horrible one for him for most of the time, for most of his life, and that I think Eudora was very reluctant to, after Margaret had said, I read all your letters, she would have been reluctant to, I think, pose a problem in this regard, so that I think both of them, you're right, Pearl, both of them were walking on eggshells, it seems.
And, it's equally disappointing because Nona Balakian was very important to Eudora. When I asked, did she want to make a dedication for the collected book review, she right away said Nona Balakian. There was a panel that they both could have been on. So I guess she obviously never had that kind of relationship with Nona to be able to say anything.
Yeah, Mary Lou was trying to get them to come to Santa Fe. Reynolds tried to get them to come to Durham. Their friends were trying to facilitate this. And I think at one point when Margaret has to have skin cancer removed and Ken stays home because of that, that seems to me, based on my own experience with having little things removed, that didn't seem enough to cancel your trip. So I think there were always lots of obstacles probably in the way.
And it seems like they were much more comfortable relying on serendipity.
Yeah.
Or their meetings, in a sense, except for the Santa Barbara conference.
Those 3 Santa Barbara conferences. Yeah,
anyway,
I think
that's me, the romantic.
I think we have Bill and then Beverly.
Yeah, fascinating conversation so far. And this is in regards to his memory loss. It's the last letter in August. There's no date on it, but from Ken to Miss Welty.
Yeah, I have that marked too. Good. Go, Bill.
Okay, he says, I'm not really grieving, nor have I any intention of not working. In fact, I have been working, though not yet on finished writing. I count my blessings too. When my father was 60, he could neither talk nor work, but he could still write a little and did. So did his father suffer from dementia as well? And his grandfather, he mentions his grandfather in the next sentence.
Perhaps, probably. I mean, people didn't recognize those things for what they were necessarily in those years, early years.
Yeah, he had some beautiful things to say about memory, how it sustains him.
Yeah.
And this is I think it's in the same letter, actually, in the paragraph before. I think the memory is not a separate faculty, but something which the mind is meant to do. A variation in warmth, which sustains a movement like the Gulf Stream in its ocean.
Yeah. That whole letter is a really powerful one. And I love the passage about the Gulf Stream. I think the memory is not a separate faculty, but something which the mind is meant to do, and variation in warmth which sustains a movement like the Gulf Streams in the ocean. There is more warmth there now than there was, thanks to you, and less anxiety now that I have spoken not only to you, but the psychologist who tested me and found me mentally normal in most respects, and my memory within the normal range. And the heartbreak of that, of course, because we know it's deteriorating, but that the touching metaphor that he applies to Eudora and their relationship. Beverly.
Back to what Pearl mentioned about why they didn't get together more, the tension when he's going to be at the Algonquin and she's going to be there a little bit later. I'm trying very hard to be generous to Margaret, but I really don't like Margaret, and I probably should be a little more sympathetic to her. But after we find out how she behaved this second trip to Santa Barbara, and then she makes a point of telling Eudora that she opens and reads her letters to Ken. I see her as very, very passive aggressive and sometimes, of course, really aggressive. And Eudora being such a gentle woman and Ken seems to be such a gentle man, I would imagine that they were afraid of her. I certainly would have been if I had been in a complicated, even if it was just an epistolary romance. They're not meeting up in the, Super 8 motel or anything. But, in this chapter in particular, I just had more reasons not to like her. And Anna did give me a collection of her short stories. Let me borrow one that I'm reading that I'm going to try to be a little more sympathetic to her. But I liked her less here and I like her less as we go along because, I don't want her to be mean to anybody.
Yeah, and Ken obviously his strategy for coping with this was to avoid conflict and to make the best of the situation. Tom can say more about that. Let's have Harriet, and then we'll see what get Tom's comment here.
My one thread of sympathy for Margaret is by realizing that Margaret is living with Ken while this is happening and that she knows about it. She knows, I mean, this is not just happening to Ken, it's also happening to her. And in fact, my memory is that the book that she's written has a wife who's living with a husband who's essentially a vegetable. So, this is a very complicated marriage that has gotten even more complicated by what's happening in Ken's health.
Yes, and her novel that she's working on, the second novel, that's the one I think that deals with the whole issue of memory and how she's trying to, obviously drawing on how she's trying to cope. Tom, do you have anything to say about that? Need to unmute you.
Yeah, I keep getting bumped off, and then I have to do that every time I come back. She was a damaged person. She had a lot of things that she was living with from earlier in her life and her upbringing. She did not have an ideal upbringing either. Everything with her daughter, it was tough. And then, when Linda first got into difficulties, so to speak, and was involved in that hit and run accident, this was, a very big story in Santa Barbara, especially front page news for weeks, and about the court proceedings, and it got very personal. The coverage about Ken and Maggie, and they were, some people blamed them because of their profession, and even, and they left town for a year. They expected it was going to be permanent, and in fact, they even made gestures towards moving to South America, where Ken had a friend who was an ambassador posted there. After Ken was in therapy for a year, they decided they could, they'd risk going back to Santa Barbara, but she barely left the house after that. And even years before that, she had difficulties going out. She didn't like to eat in front of people. She didn't like to go to, she had some issues, which, unlike Ken, she didn't really attempt to see anybody professional at all. And so I don't want to ramble, but I liked Maggie and spent a little time with her, and it's hard for me, of course, all the evidence, all the events we know about, and so on. But she had a tough row to hoe, and she did institute a call to Miss Welty, I think, on a day unexpectedly when Ken was having a good day towards the end. They said, let's call Eudora. And, there were, I don't know, and I'm uncomfortable about it, but we can all have our opinions. But Ken knew she was difficult, and but he told somebody, she won't confront you, she'll just be difficult, but she's not going to be, he's not going to be violent or, what could they do? And she was going blind and she lost a lung and so on. So it's tough. Everybody has a tough life.
You're asking us, and I think wisely, to take a sort of Ross Macdonald, Eudora Welty kind of view of Margaret and recognize her as a human being with her own difficulties and as one worthy of our sympathy. Yeah.
I must say that those excerpts that Harriet read so beautifully sound very like Ross Macdonald book to me. Even a specific Macdonald book, there's one about a child or an infant who witnesses violent murder and represses it forever, almost. So I know that's not an uncommon theme, but it's another example, perhaps, of how they influenced each other.
Somebody speak, Harriet.
Yeah, well, I had raised my hand to respond to Bill, actually, and I got caught off on talking about Margaret. But I also, I would love if maybe next time you would talk a little bit about your favorite Macdonald novels and why. Because I think you have range there that you just showed us. When you said there's a particular novel that's a little bit like the Shadow Club. Yeah. But I wanted to talk more about this, he's 61 years old and he is, these letters are very much about aging.
Just a kid to me. He's just a kid to me.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, I'm thinking about my sense of his grief and effort at acceptance and the way in which he is struggling with it. Of course, is not able to accept it, and the role that Eudora plays in their in his efforts. Probably, I'm thinking going back to his failure of memory function, probably within the normal limits of my age. Got colors, if not flying ones. With a combination of luck and cunning, persuaded myself to accept the change and did, he asserts. I would have, another letter, I would have written you about my memory problem if I hadn't known that you would in any case notice, and she has noticed. And then I'm thinking about,
she won't mention it. She's too reticent to mention
shy.
it.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah. But he's also seems to be trying to hold on to memories, to pull them back, that the travel is maybe an effort to revisit and recover past memories. There's his regret for the book that he hasn't written about his father, that he won't be able to write. And then what I really wanted to get to was his response to her. I want to go back to, I wouldn't have written you, but I'm glad I did. Part of the problem is a sense of isolation that simply evaporates when I'm in contact with you. There is no end to your loving intelligence, your intelligent love. And then she later invites him to write. I mean, what she has a sense that what he needs to do is to write about it. Would it be any use to you to write about this to me? I would try to be a reader of understanding and imagination and safety. But think what that would have been. if he could have written about it while it was happening. Yeah.
I wanted to call our attention to a similar passage. We do somehow learn to write, this is on November 29th, 1976. We do somehow learn to write stories out of us, however disguised, and given other players who can move and act where possibly we can't. And all, but in the end, if hurt still stays, that's wrong. It's been a good deal on my mind, but when your letter came today, I wanted to ask you now if there is any way you know of that I could be of any help. Right. This is where you were starting here. Yeah. Of course, you have written around and about it your father's, I know no word, his doings, and into it and out of it, while you were yourself have made a whole life that is good and truly good, aware and unhurting and understanding of others, a shining way to have dealt with what was done to you. But it hasn't seemed to have been enough for you to bring you any real peace of mind. Would it be of any use for you to write about it to me, trying a new way if it came to you? You have written about it in me to letters, you know. The first time I thought of asking you this was when I read your letter about walking in Kitchener, that you wrote when you came back from your trip to London, the old stone rooming house where there was a happy week or so in your 7th year with your father. I know you've thought and thought so much and so long about putting it down and have worked it out in many circuitous ways. Maybe there are endless circuitous ways. I know I may be out of my depth. You will understand, though, what makes me try. I would try to be a reader of understanding and imagination and safety. Write about it. You know, fiction can be a way of disguising your life. Follow that autobiographical impulse, but then that he can't. He just can't. Jane.
I had that same quote that you just read bookmarked as well in my digital version here. I have never read a Bill Macdonald novel, but you can't help but want to, reading Eudora's comments on the books and how wonderful they are. She is indeed not only an encourager of him and his work, but she's so insightful. I just love her comments. There is on page 279 of my version, I think it's July 2nd is the passage. He writes, "It's not the only way your work is of a different order from Chandler's, but it's an important way. The way of seeing, the point of view, the view of life, the vision in every writer. How can these things be separated? I should have said the act of seeing, the action, really. She is such an insightful person. I believe that they were, just destined to somehow be together, if only through writing. And she can see the worth of his writing when others might just put him down as another mystery writer."
I agree. I think interesting that she mentioned Chandler there. You know, I like your work better than Chandler's, and of course, Chandler had been critical of Macdonald. Macdonald had resented it, and I didn't know that they ever talked about it. But here is a sort of indication that maybe they have, and she's saying, you know, what you're doing is better than Chandler. I also wanted us to talk about what she said about Wilkie Collins at some point, if we can. Joelle.
Yeah, I'd like to circle us back more toward the beginning as well. It's clear during 1976 that Eudora Welty was having problems writing, Ken was having problems with his memory, and this a sequence of letters kind of breaks in half because the first part has places where it's just wonderful. I love Ken talking about St. Olaf College and Rolling Stone in the same person in connection with the fellow interviewing him. But earlier on, they're talking more, probably prompted by the publication of Blue Hammer, but about I think it's on page 294, where he talks about, or maybe I don't remember which one talked about the compulsions of popular art, but it's mentioned that Agatha Christie died. They're talking about Dick Francis, whom she has met. And they really get into some excellent conversation about writing. The beauty of this mystery series method, Ken says, it goes over, you can go over and over the same material until you get it right or even wrong. One way to write a novel on the curve of its possible manifestations. And Welty writes about how it's impossible in a short story to write in a straight line. They talk about telling straight stories. And there's really some wonderful energy in here, which I think is kind of capped around page 290, where Ken signs off with great energy and referring to Margaret as the two-book kid. There's some really light touches, and this speculating about popular fiction and Rolling Stone really really brings us down then later. But I don't want us to forget just how wonderful the first part of this year was.
Well, I think the second part of the chapter is really, but you're right, it just sort of splits in half, and
Yeah.
it's on the edge of what revelations about memory, but or maybe even on the Santa Barbara Writers Conference, before and after, and the number of letters is fewer, but each half has its power, I think, and the second half is a very painful one. Yeah, Bill.
Thanks. You mentioned the Kitchener trip that he took before he went to London, and I'm focused on memory in this particular chapter, and there's so many beautiful things that he wrote about memory, but this one is it's in the October 17th letter to Miss Welty. He says,
about his trip, right?
Yes. He says, but as I walked the London streets, I kept remembering a walk I had taken the previous week through the streets of Kitchener, Ontario, where Margaret was born and Linda spent her first 2 years, and where the past rose around me, not threateningly, but lending some support as water supports a swimmer. Very beautiful.
Yeah. I wanted to look at that letter too. I love that passage where he decides to go to Venice, and I thought I'd try to get Pearl to talk about Venice here because she's talked to, but first Monica, but then I want to get Pearl because she's written about Venice and Eudora's work, and then Eudora tells him about being to Venice, and so they're sharing these memories of travel. I'd like to talk about that, but first Monica. But first.
No, I really appreciate that Bill brought up that line because I had marked that line about the past rising up, and then I also wanted to point out that later on in that paragraph, um, he says the difficult past sustained the difficult present, and I just really am intrigued by this theme in this letter of his about how it's the difficulties in the past that actually are kind of bearing us up now, which I think is a really I mean, I guess that's also like how he's getting through life right now is all of these difficulties in his past. He's finding a way to use them now.
Yes. Wow. Pearl, are
I
you
would love to.
this?
Sorry, Suzanne, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I would love to draw our attention to another comment from the chat. I want to echo Charla. I do this off of the recording all the time, but she says that the endnotes are a delight to explore with each chapter. So you guys did really excellent work there. But Christina also has a comment. She says, Ken's relative youthfulness when he begins to struggle with cognitive issues is heartbreaking and would, in all likeliness, be considered early onset Alzheimer's today. This is probably an unfair question, but Tom, Christina is wondering, do you have an idea of what strategies he and perhaps Margaret might have employed to keep his dementia at bay, whether they were medical interventions or just practical ones within the home?
Well, I know that early on, as it were, he thought that perhaps his problems with memory, early memories, stemmed from a subconscious attempt to repress the pain of his youth. He thought perhaps he was bringing this on by trying to explore his past through fiction. He went to a doctor. He went to a couple of different doctors. including, I think, a psychiatrist he knew. And they gave him, some kind of pills, this or that pill, not really acknowledging the specific problems, the nature of what might actually be going on. It was missed or misdiagnosed, or you know. So some attempts were made to alleviate this, cope with this. I think he began drinking a little bit to coax himself into writing, or make writing a little more easy or spontaneous. But that was sort of the basis of it. That was the extent of it, I should say.
And so little was known, relatively speaking, then, as compared to today, I think. Yeah. Right. Pearl, if I move this back, go ahead.
Well, these later letters are the most beautiful letters in the book, I think, where she's commenting on, and so perceptively and sympathetically, and it's just her letters to him are heartbreaking, and her attempts to help, and his response, that her perception is as clear as a shadow that gives warmth. And when she says to him, I'm taking both your hands now to tell you, you never need to feel alone again.
All right, Pearl, I'm going to move us back to less emotionally charged territory, but important, I think. What about Venice? What did you think about the comments about Venice?
Oh, yes.
Are you asking me?
I am.
And what is the question again? I'm sorry.
I wondered if you would talk about what she said about Venice and what Ken said about Venice.
Oh, yeah, it was wonderful to see these little pieces come back and come back into form. And also, I think it was that time when she said, well, I'll tell you more about Robinson at another time, kind of thing. So she's sort of opening up there a little bit. And also, this is not Venice, but when she talks about the stereopticon, I think like, oh, this is so interesting. She's trying to really make their lives connect, as we've been saying for weeks now, connect in every possible little spot, kind of thing.
Yeah, she does mention John Robinson, and she has not before, but she talks about, I have a friend here who's I've known for a long time, who lives in Italy now. I'll tell you more about him. So first broaching much more information about John Robinson than she'd given before. Yeah. Beverly.
In this last letter, I thought her offering him the service, the friendship that William Maxwell offered her when she couldn't type because her mother couldn't stand the sound of the typewriter. And so Bill Maxwell, as she says, had just said, send me what you've written. I'm not going to comment on it. I'll have it transcribed. And so it would give her the opportunity to continue to create in the environment that she was living in at the time. But I think that was a touching, not only her offering that same service to Ken, but that William Maxwell did that for her when she could not write with all that was going on after her mother was ill and, brothers and all of that.
And reassuring him after he's expressed rather tactfully the fact that he doesn't like to have anyone read what he's working on. And she's, you can send it to me without worry. Yeah. Yeah, Jo Ellen.
This conversation in part is just making me wonder how many different little pieces of it really are about writing at their ages or with their situations. Monica mentioned the difficult past sustains the difficult presence. It's kind of like making lemonade. But when Welty is talking about Constable, I think that's on page 303,
Good.
and how
Glad we
he,
got to that. No, yeah.
yeah, that he was born, he was painting the same cottage that he went by every day. I can't remember exactly what it was, but there was a sense of serenity, and that's kind of like she ends up saying our subjects are the same. So the difficult past, the difficult present, there's a thread through there. And I was reminded, I think it's on the bottom of page 259, a letter from early March 1976, when Ken is learning, he says, I'm beginning to hope, to hope that this, and he's talking about the curve, that this may be a way to write a novel on the curve of its possible manifestations, not necessarily knowing where that line will deviate to, but trying to be attentive to it, and it's part of them talking about changes that they're dealing with in their lives and addressing in their work, I think.
Yes, and this is a very difficult period for Eudora to write, not just for
Yes.
Ken. And she's not having the memory difficulties he is, but she has lost Dermot as her first reader. Bill Maxwell has retired, a voice she's relied upon. Uh, she's, I think, afraid of not doing what is going to be worthy of what she's done before. All of this is keeping her from writing. She does finish the eye of the story. It gets turned in this chapter, and she starts the new story. And too bad she didn't finish the Shadow Club, because it was a powerful, fragmentary as it is, a powerful piece. Yeah, Pearl.
I think Tom wanted to say something first.
Tom, did you have something?
Oh, not necessarily. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, I was just going to concur certainly with what you've said, Suzanne. I have always thought that losing her first and most important reader was a very difficult thing for her, because who would she trust to say this isn't as good as you want it to be? When she has the reputation and all the awards now, so that people would publish anything that she wrote. And losing Dermot, I think, is a huge thing. And having William Maxwell retire. And but that brought me to my question that I started with, which was, why hasn't she said anything to Ken about collecting these pieces in the eye of the story, that all of a sudden she says, I turned in my collection? So was she afraid of her progress when he was struggling, and so that's why she withholds that? Or I don't know, did she take pleasure in collecting all the pieces?
It's an interesting question, because she has talked to him about the Cather essay. They've talked a bit about Jane Austen. They talk about Reynolds all the time. She does mention that she's written a review of Virginia Woolf's letters. So, she mentions some pieces, but there's not a lot about it. And I think that may be out of worry for him more than reticence about the eye of the story. But this is the book she's going to dedicate to him. It's the book he encourages her to produce. Harriet and then Joellen.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, that this is the book that he's encouraged her to put together. But we are missing some of her letters here, aren't we? So it's possible that she's brought it up, but it is a surprise. I think that what strikes me more than anything else in terms of they're not telephoning, say, is that they want to, that this relationship is about writing. And it's what they are enjoying in it. And so it doesn't surprise me that they keep it in letters.
I'm just now reading the correspondent, and the woman in the correspondent will be very annoyed to have to call on the telephone. She wants it in writing. Yeah. Yeah. Joellen.
I just wanted to remind us once again that they had to have had intimate conversations in the car when they were driving in California, and who knows what they talked about for hours and hours when they first met. But these opportunities when they were in person would have been just precious moments for covering a range of things that they didn't necessarily write about. We've thought about the restrictions on at least Eudora's write letters being sent to where Margaret might read them. But anyway, I think just keeping all that in mind is good too. And they were looking forward to more conversations again. But anyway,
I think that's really important. They have hours of conversations and hours. And I think that reference to Chandler is probably indicative of the fact that they've talked about Chandler.
Yeah.
They haven't written about him before, but they've talked about this. Yeah. Anna, are you about to tell us it's time to go?
I sure am. Is there any last comment from anyone else before we wrap up before our little spring break? Okay. Do I see Joe Ellen's hand?
A last comment, just not all that terribly important, but just in case you're not aware and didn't see the footnote, Ken Miller's account of Agatha Christie's disappearance is way wrong. It's just, I don't know whether it was a memory thing or he just got it all screwed up. It wasn't something that he knew very much about, but that's not what happened. So just so you know.
That was long. Excuse me, that was long before there had been a lot of research and writing about that, and even before the first little book was written about that incident and so on. So,
thank you for that, Joellen, and for that, Tom, as well. And thank you all for joining us over the past few weeks. This has been such a treat. We've all been so delighted at the response and the interactive discussions that we've had covering Miss Welty's and Ross Macdonald's correspondence. Another reminder that we will be on a 2-week spring break next Monday and the following Monday. We will resume our discussions Monday, March 23rd. So we will see you guys in 2 weeks, and you guys have a wonderful time apart. We'll miss you.
Thanks for all the good times talking. Yeah. See you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.